Hi everybody, welcome back to the farmhouse. You might remember a while back I showed you a video where I was cleaning an antique sink that a friend of ours had given us to get it ready to install in our house. And we did recently get that done, and so I thought that I would just give you a little video here kind of talking about everything that goes along with installing an antique sink into a house that already has a kitchen. Like, so you're not actually able to custom fit the sink into your house because it just doesn't fit in there exactly perfect. So anytime you start trying to use these fixtures and appliances, you know, like stoves and sinks and things that were made 100 years ago or close to it, there's always going to be complications that come up. It's not just as easy, you know, as going down to Home Depot, buying a new sink, sticking it in the hole, hooking it up, and you're done. There's always complications. So I just thought that I would kind of take you through the process of all of the things that we had to do, you know, to our kitchen in order to be able to install the sink in the kitchen and get it working. Because like I said, it is a little bit complicated. And so this way, if you're thinking about doing something like that, you know, you'll kind of know what to expect, what to take into consideration, and all of that before you go and spend a lot of money on a sink. They're, you know, not cheap. And so before you go and spend that money to buy one, you need to make sure that you're going to be able to use it in your kitchen and make it work. So this is the third double drain board sink that I've had in my kitchen. When we originally redid our kitchen, we just had a normal kitchen sink, nothing special. And then several years ago, we kind of redid the kitchen again, and that's when I got my first double drain board sink. So I got that first one. It had been in my barn for years. I had gotten it out of a house that was my husband's aunt's house. And I think at one time it had been used as like a boarding house. And so I really believe this sink was like probably considered a commercial maybe sink at the time, because I really haven't seen hardly any of these sinks. So the first one that I got was stainless steel, double drain board, awesome sink. I loved it. Very functional. Nothing bad to say about it. But I decided I wanted a white one instead of stainless steel. So that's when the second one came into the picture, and I ended up getting this white. So it was metal with porcelain over the top of it and double drain boards. If you ever have a double drain board sink, if you wash a lot of dishes, you will love it, and you will never want to have to wash dishes without it. It's just so handy, and it keeps all of the water right there in the sink. And it just makes the whole dishwashing thing a lot easier. But anyway, so now we are installing the third double drain board sink into our kitchen, and my husband said it would be the last one because he's not doing this again. This one is a lot bigger and a lot heavier, and honestly, it ended up posing a lot more problems. The first two were pretty easy. There wasn't a lot of problems with putting those in, but they were made differently. This one we're doing now is a lot older, and it's made different, and so it just really was a lot more complicated to install than the others. But I'm going to go ahead and get to it and tell you all about the whole process and what we had to do in order to get the sink into the kitchen. So the first thing we had to do was get the old one out, and that was not too hard, except that it was screwed in some places that we couldn't see from underneath the sink, so it didn't want to come out of the hole. So it took a little while to figure out where the screws were, and then, you know, get that thing out of there. once we got it out of there, so then you can see the hole that we have to put the new sink in. And one thing to note here is that we have wood countertops. So what you can see is you can see plywood, which is like the base of the countertop, and then we have heart pine over the top of that, and that's what our countertops are. So the fact that we have wood countertops actually makes the whole process a whole lot easier. If you have something like, you know, granite, marble, ceramic tile, something like that, it might be a lot harder for you to get a sink like this, because you might have to cut your space open bigger, and that would probably be a pretty big issue if you have that type of a countertop. So that's something to consider. This is what the sink looked like before, when I first got it, before I ever cleaned it up. And so this is what it looks like now. It's sitting on the porch. It's all ready to go into the kitchen. It's been cleaned up, and here are all, you know, it's got all of the tools and the faucet and all that stuff, and ready to go in there. So the first obstacle we had to deal with was this light switch. There was a light switch right above the sink in the kitchen, which wasn't a problem with the other sinks because they had a low back. This new sink has a high back, and so the back of the sink actually is going to come up to like the middle of the light switch. So the light switch has to either be done away with, or it has to be moved up. So that was a little hard to do, and of course he had to do it by lamplight in the dark, because we had to turn all of the power in the kitchen off to get the switch not live anymore. So dealing with the light switch was the first problem that we had to deal with. After that, we we turned the sink over and started looking at and measuring the distance. It's got these little feet underneath it, these metal feet, and we couldn't figure out before we got the old sink out whether it was going to fit in the space we had to put it in until we got that old sink out. So we measured the distance that the feet are, you know, from the middle of the sink, which is where the actual hole is, and figured out that it was not going to fit in the space that we had because they were too far out. So to fix that problem, we had to cut the countertop back a little bit further. I don't remember, maybe like 3 inches on each side, something like that, which for us was not a problem, like I said, because we have wood countertops, and so they were easy to cut. But if you had something else, that would be a problem. So that's something that you would need to take into consideration. So my husband started out with this little small saw, cutting those countertops, and figured out that it was going to take forever to do it that way. So he ended up getting the circular saw and cutting the wood away with that. The problem with the circular saw is it can't cut all the way up to the wall, so he had to get a hammer and a pry bar and kind of finish getting that wood out of there up by the wall, so that that would be a clean strip. And then we had to do that on both sides of the sink. These boards that are there were there to support the other two sinks that we had. They were there to support the two sides where the drain boards were, because those were thinner metal sinks, and so if something really heavy would have gotten put on them and they wouldn't have had support under them, then it probably would have bent the sink. But these but they need to leave now because they're going to be in the way of those feet on the new cast iron sink. So he had to go ahead and get those boards, which were screwed down. He had to get those boards out of there so that the space would be totally open. And this sink doesn't need any support because it's so thick and so heavy. Nothing's gonna, it's cast iron. It's not gonna bend. Nothing's gonna happen to it. So that was the other thing. We had to take those things out. So after we did all that, it's time to move the sink in, which the sink is super heavy. Like, he said he thinks it's probably weighs around 250 pounds. It was just really heavy and awkward to try to move and get in. But got it in, and then got it in the hole, and then it wasn't perfectly centered because there's a little wiggle room in there. So once it was in the hole, they couldn't slide it to get it centered. So I ended up having to put these two little pieces of wood under it on each side in order to be able to kind of slide it over to get it perfectly centered in. So once all that was done, it was there, it's in the place where it needs to be, and it's time to start hooking up the faucet. So now with the sink in place, you can probably tell that it is not up next to the wall. It's not pushed all the way back to the wall. This sink it's wider with the big drain boards. It's several inches wider than my last one was, but it's not as deep, like from front to back. So if we pushed it all the way back against the wall, it would be about 4, maybe a little bit more inches away from the front edge of the counter, which might make it a little bit difficult to wash dishes that way, because it would, your sink would actually be further back. I'm not sure if it would or not, but it might. So the other issue with that is that we would have to cut a hole in the wall behind the high back part of the sink in order for the back part of the faucet, the plumbing part of the faucet, to be able to go into the sink, because it sticks out further than like that width that the actual back of the sink is. The faucet part sticks out further than that. So we would have to cut a hole into the wall, and I wasn't really sure that I would like it being that far from the front of the sink. So what we decided to do was to bring it forward and then fill that space behind it, which is about 3.5 inches, with a board. And what we did is we had this old mantle piece, the board, and it was it was big enough, it was tall enough and wide enough. So my husband just trimmed it down to be the same height as the back of the sink and the same width as the sink, and then that's what we put behind the sink to fill in that hole. I really liked the idea of doing it that way because it was going to make a little shelf behind the sink, and I really thought that I would enjoy having that little shelf, because I don't have a window over my sink. Most people have a window, and they have a window ledge where they can set little things and stuff like that, and I've never had that in this house because obviously my sink is on an inside wall. So I really like the idea of having the little shelf, and actually it ended up being really fun. We got this sink in right before Christmas, and so I was able to decorate it, and I put this little garland on the sink, and I just really enjoyed it for the whole Christmas season. I enjoyed washing dishes with the pretty garland there. So I'm really glad that we ended up deciding to do it this way. Now, the thing about the board behind it, and this part I totally did not film or take pictures of. this ended up being a really long process, and by the time we were at this part, I was pretty tired, and I wasn't even thinking about it, because I stood there and watched my husband do it, but with my phone in my hand, and never thought, oh, I should take a picture or I should record this. But he had to cope the board out behind the faucet, because remember I said that the back of the faucet where all the plumbing part is, it sticks out further than the sink, so it also won't fit there with that solid board there. So he had to cope a big space out of the board in order for that plumbing part of the faucet to fit in. And the way he did that was he took his circular saw, he measured where it needed to be, and he took his circular saw and he just cut a lot of strips in that area where it needed to be. And then he took a hammer and a chisel and he chiseled that part out of the wood behind where the sink faucet is, and then it fit. So he kind of just got that out of there, and then the board slipped down behind the sink and it fit perfectly. But I'm sorry I didn't record that part. That was probably one of the major things that he had to do, was to work on that big mantle board piece and make it fit around the faucet and behind the sink. It had to fit perfectly in that space behind the sink, and then it had to fit around the faucet and all of that. But anyway, that's how he did it. Sorry I didn't record it. So I had ordered a really pretty copper basket strainer to go in the bottom of the sink, and when we went to put it in, it did not fit. The reason it didn't fit was because the sink is cast iron, and so it's thicker. We kind of came to a standstill, and we checked all kind of places. We couldn't find one. So my husband went and found, back at the barn, there was an old sink. It was actually an old handmade sink that someone had made. He checked the basket strainer piece that was in that sink, and it looked like it would work. So he pulled it out, brought it in here, and sure enough, it fit. It worked. It's a solid brass basket strainer that's very aged, and so I really like the way it looks. I like it better than the one that I had ordered, so I was pretty excited about that. I think it looks really good with the faucet. It's just got that really, vintage look to it, and that's what I like. But I was so happy that he found this piece and that it fit, and so then he was able to go ahead and get all of the plumbing hooked up, and we were able to get the sink working again. And then I was able to find the actual basket to go with it that I think matches pretty good. I like the way it looks, and so I'm also, pretty happy with that. So that's really all that we had to do to get the sink hooked up. So now here it is finished. I really love the way it turned out. I have been enjoying using it. If you know me, or you know me from my channel, you know that I love vintage things. I have a vintage stove that was in our house when we bought it, and I really love having the vintage sink that kind of matches the whole time frame with the stove, and I just really think it kind of finishes off the kitchen. And for me, it was worth all of the work it took to put this new old sink in. I'm not sure that my husband agrees with that, and he did tell me that I better not ever decide I want a different sink, because he's not taking this one out. It's too heavy and too bulky and too hard to deal with, so hopefully nothing will happen to it. But anyway, so I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that it helps you if you have ever thought you might want to get a vintage sink, just to kind of know some things to check out, to know what to look for, and to be able to look at your kitchen and see whether that you think it will work or not. Like I said, before you get too far into the whole deal with doing that. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and go ahead and subscribe to my channel If you hit the little bell, you'll be notified anytime I make a new video. And I just want to say that I really appreciate you all being here and watching my videos. And I hope to see you back again next week for a new video. And there's a